You've heard it said before that blood is thicker than water. Have you ever heard that, Evan? Well, there's a statement that says blood is thicker than water. It basically is speaking to the fact that the blood you share with your brothers and sisters makes you family. I have brothers and sisters. We're in our 50s now. Actually, the two older ones are in their 60s. There's 5 of us. I'm the middle one. Of those 5, there are now 16 children, and if you include stepchildren with that, there's 20 children that have come from these 5 people. And there's 22 grandchildren. As of last month, it's 22. 2 were added at one time in my family. So we're scattered all over. We have relatives in Tennessee, in South Carolina, and here in North Carolina. So we're all over the place. But I can tell you right now that when crisis comes or when great joy comes, we come together. I have a brother, like I'm the 3rd one in the list. And so I have a younger brother, his name is Dan. And when we were growing up, we shared a room together. And I remember distinctly about sharing that room, that it was a race to go to sleep. Because Dan, even when he's like 5 years old, is snoring like a bear. And so I'm like, Lord, please let me get to sleep before Dan starts to snore, because I don't know if I'll be able to after he gets going. But we shared a room, and we did all sorts of stuff, from playing paper baseball in that room to just all sorts of things there. And it has been over 30 years, actually over 35 years, since I've even lived in the same town with my brother Dan. But I can share with you that even like just a few years ago, there was a crisis that came into my life and Louette's life. And when that crisis came, my brother, who's in South Carolina, made multiple phone calls. He works, he's from Columbia, South Carolina. He had a work trip to Richmond, Virginia, and it just so happened that he needed to come right through my hometown of Rocky Mount and stop for breakfast one morning. It just happened. He came and affirmed me when I was doubting me. He helped me by making contacts when I was needing work. He gave his time, he gave his resources, and more than any of that, he actually shared a broken heart. I mean, he loves me enough that he even invited us to go to a South Carolina football game last year. I don't know if that's love or not. But he invited us to go to a South Carolina football game last year and bought me apparel to wear to the game, because I didn't have any South Carolina Gamecocks apparel. So blood is thicker than water. Much time has lapsed, and yet he's still my brother, and we can, like that, just jump right back into conversations and experiences and thought processes that are just unified. However, I want to make a proposal to you today. And that proposal is this: that while blood is thicker than water, the Spirit is thicker than blood. There's actual biblical language to verify what I just said when you talk about those who have a life in the Spirit. You remember in Matthew chapter 6 where Jesus is doing the Sermon on the Mount, and he teaches them, he's talking to them about when you pray, don't necessarily pray like those who want to be seen, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, this is how you pray. When he starts that prayer, how does he refer to God? Our Father. Go to Galatians chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. It's a fantastic passage where it says that you and I are adopted as sons. We are redeemed. It actually says we start out in a position of slavery. Slavery to our sin, the flesh in us, and the world about us. And we're bought out of that by Him at great cost. And not only are we bought out of the travesty of slavery, but we're made heirs. And as heirs, we actually receive His Spirit into our heart that changes us to the point that we end up crying out, Abba. If you think Father is like this distant word for the one who is your Father, it goes beyond that. He says, Abba, Father, an intimate, deeply relational expression for relationship that we have with God. Those who have the Spirit, it says in John chapter 1 that they've been born by the Spirit. The text actually says, born not of blood, nor the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but the will of God. The scriptures are full of language that refers to those who have life in the Spirit through faith in Jesus Christ as being family. Paul, in his writings, it's all over the place. There are over 100 references to the term brothers and sisters in Paul's writings. Just here in 1 Timothy, you've seen it, these family relational ties. In chapter 1, Paul actually refers to Timothy, the younger one among you, as his child. You're my true child in the faith. You have here in chapter 4, back in verse 6, it says, put these things before not just the ones who are listening or the ones underneath you. It says, put it before the brothers and sisters. It referred back at the end of chapter 3 in what we have been going through in 1 Timothy, that we are the household of faith. Now, this is not just a geographical and ethnic and socially limited term. It's not like we're family because we all live in Durham and we believe in Jesus. Actually, Paul has in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 talked about the church in Macedonia, which is like in the area where Greece is, and that they were giving relief to the saints, to brothers and sisters who were in Jerusalem. You had people of means giving beyond their means to people who were poor and had nothing. But the unity was because was in that they were family. They were brothers and they were sisters. The point is this: we, that is, those of us in this room who have been made new in Jesus and have received a life in the Spirit, we are family. And I'm telling you that family connection is deeper and it's longer lasting than any biological kinship. We are eternally brothers and sisters before God, who is our Father, through Jesus, who is our elder brother. Now, there's a lot of practical implications for that, living as family. And so we're going to walk through the text here, these two verses that Derek read for us, and think through these family dynamics. What is it to be family? In this specific text that Derek read, it speaks of older men and older women and younger women. The one thing you can note about that is this: if you are in a family, it's more than one person, right? It takes more than one to be family. And look, here's the deal, and this is what happens. As soon as you have more than one person, there's going to have to be some kind of interaction, communication, and working together in order to actually flesh out life together. I mean, even Louette and I, here we are at this stage of life. We've got 4 boys, but they're all out of the house now, essentially. We have an empty nest. But there's still 2 of us there. And it requires communication and relating with one another. In order for us to function in this life together, we are family. Even just us. The more people there are, here's where this ends up going, though. The more people there are, the more difference there is in perspective and in desire and in understanding and in need. You know this from your own biological family scenarios, don't you? The text ends up speaking to men and women. And here's just a news flash for you: men and women are different. It also speaks to the fact that you have older and younger. Another news flash: older and younger, your needs and your perspectives are different. And quite frankly, in the context of a church setting, your life background and your perspectives are different. So there's a question that is begged when you recognize, okay, you guys, great, you're a family, made up of men and women and older and younger and different backgrounds. But the question is asked, how can different people from different perspectives and different points of need actually function together? The catchphrase now, how can we live in community? So the scriptures are fantastic in help here. They take orthodox belief, this statement that was made right at the first, that God is our Father, the statement that was actually said in the creed we repeated. God is our Father. The statement that the text here says that because of that, we've been adopted as sons and daughters, and we are now heirs with God. We have been made a part of the household of God. That's a fantastic truth, but the scriptures end up taking that and bringing it to a point where we can actually practice this right teaching. Where you can actually take this concept of you are in a family and now you have to live that out together day by day, day in, day out. So what is true in my belief and doctrine is going to be applied in my practice, in my Christian living. Now, for the next 3 or 4 Sundays, we're actually going to look at that as we look through chapter 5 here and the very first of chapter 6. Like next week, it's going to be specifically applied into what do you do when you have family that is in a place of need? And the specific application is going to be to widows. There's a lot to unpack there, but this Sunday, we're going to talk about, the text is going to talk about how it is to be family across generations and gender. So now look, when you think of your own biological family, and you think of this multi-generational and multi-gendered, men and women, I'm sure, at least most folks, and some of you, let me just completely say this, not all of us have a great experience with our family in this world. There may have been abuse, there may have been just dysfunction, and we understand that. And, the Lord is good and kind in that He can redeem that and give you family in His church that is helpful and whole. So just know that we care for you, and where there has been hurt in family, we don't want there to be misunderstanding or feeling of left out. But for many of us, there's warm thoughts of family. Many of you have grandparents that all you can think of is just how amazing they were. And maybe even what a good influence they were on you, how much you appreciated them. Maybe you, like I had this special aunt. She was 12 years older than my mom. She was my mom's aunt, actually, so she was my great aunt. She never had children, so she treated me and my siblings like we were her children. And I have these fond memories of that. But by the same token, as we think about these fond memories maybe of grandparents or special aunts and uncles and such, we have to admit that families have had to deal with generation gaps, have they not? I mean, you probably have someone in your biological family that you think of as a grumpy old man or a crazy aunt. Or maybe you look and you say, you got just these foolish, reckless young people. Just ridiculously reckless. What's our tendency to do with people that we see as grumpy or crazy or reckless? What do you tend to do with a person like that? Yeah. We write them off. First of all, we label them. Then we mark them off. And we distance ourselves from them. This is exactly what you guys were saying. And if you're in a family that begins to take these generation gaps in ways where what you do is label and mark off and distance from, you end up with dysfunction within your family. You end up with relational distance in your family, and you ultimately end up with an arrogant dismissal and ultimately brokenness. And the sad thing, this can happen not just in your biological family, but it can happen in the household of God. So the question is then again begged, what's the remedy to the dysfunction that we often see within family dynamics? How should the generations and the genders relate to one another? That's what the text is going to instruct us today. So let's look at the text And let's just see what it's saying. I'm not going to reread it. I'm going to ask you some questions from Derek's reading and from your observation as you look at these two verses. Question number 1. When you look at it, what is the operative word there? What's the action that's being called for from you as a member within your family in the household of God? What's the action word? It's encourage. We're being asked to encourage. So let me ask the second question. Who are the recipients of this encouragement? If you're supposed to encourage, who is it that you're supposed to be encouraging? What's the first one? Okay, it says with older men. And you'll move on to verse number 2, and it says ladies as well, older ladies. What's the context in which this encouragement is taking place? The first 3 words of the verses. It says, do not rebuke. So, what is it that brings about the need for rebuke? Huh? There needs to be some correction. There's some kind of conflict. This is just human life, is it not? We end up, if we interact with people, with misunderstandings and with conflict and with areas that need correction. And so, in the context of family, you're going to have that. And what this is telling us is that we need to encourage, and it specifically says first, encourage older men and then also older women. So I want to make a quick statement about that. Age, either older or younger, but age is not a pass for misbehavior. I mean, just because somebody is young, or just because somebody is just really old, it is not permission to overlook or to discount the willful misbehavior that needs to be corrected in the person who is old. It's not the right of an old person just to be grumpy or cantankerous or hard to get along with. And what Paul is doing here as he speaks to Timothy, who you heard in the last chapter say, don't let them despise your youth. In other words, be grown up and don't act like the misgivings of youth. He's telling him that if you're going to be leadership here, Timothy, there will be times where conflict's going to arise, and even those who are older than you will have to be confronted. Their behavior is going to have to be addressed. So the question is, not will you have to address issues with older folks, but how do you address issues with older folks? And like the opening question, as we looked in this, the operative word is that we are to do what? We are to encourage. The actual word encourage here, it's a 2-part word. One part of it is to call out or to speak, but it has a prefix to it that says alongside. It's to call out or speak, but to do so alongside. It is, in this context, a corrective. There's a need for rebuke. So, quick question, just to put it down to where you have lived probably. Have any of you ever had to go to your father or to your mother and offer a corrective? How did you approach them? Huh? Okay, there's a cautiousness, probably wise. And some of that's because, and I'm not saying in your case, but some of that's because you know if I come at them, they're going to be grumpy. Or they're going to be, who do you think you are? Or I'm the authority. That's very possible. My hunch is that many of us, when we've had scenarios like that, instead of actually addressing or confronting the scenario that needed to be addressed, we ignored it. We actually distanced ourselves from it. But from what Paul's saying here, that's not an option for Timothy. It is an option in our American landscape. We are so individualistic. We are so independent and we have the means financially and in so many other ways to be able to say, I don't need you. So I'm just not going to engage you. I'm not going to address it with you. The call here, though, is that we need to. We need to approach the elder brother with respect that's due to his or her generational status. It says to approach the older man as a father and the older woman as a mother. Now, I want you to follow with me what I'm thinking here, okay? If we are to approach them as a father or a mother, how does this connect, perhaps, say, to the fifth commandment in the Ten Commandments? What does it say there that we are to do with our father and mother? Honor them. That honor is connected to an authority. And ultimately, when we don't honor those authorities, we ultimately are not honoring the ultimate authority, which is God Himself. Now, we see this happen all the time where authority, people who are older and deserving of honor, have to be confronted with whatever the circumstance is or whatever the conflict is or whatever the problem is, as it relates to God Himself. When you read the Psalms, they're full of persons coming to God who is the sovereign with their problem. Sometimes even with their lack of understanding of why you are doing what you're doing. Psalm 13, David comes and says, "How long, O Lord?" Psalm 22, which Jesus quotes on the cross to the Father. "Why, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Psalm 43, David, the author, he says, "Vindicate me, O God. Why have you rejected me?" Can you hear the conflict, the family discord? The lack of understanding? So there has to be honest and real addressing of whatever it is that is the circumstance, but it needs to be from a position of respect and honor of the one who's being addressed. Take that Psalm 43 passage I just referenced. We actually encouraged you a few weeks ago to read that every day. Where David says, "Vindicate me, O God. Why have you rejected me?" He says that in the first verse, but when you get to the last verse, the fifth or sixth verse, he ends up turning that to saying, he speaks to himself, "Oh, my soul, why are you cast down? Hope in God. Place your hope and your trust and your rest in Him." Now, I don't want you to misunderstand something. As we're talking about how this approach to God with whatever the conflict or the contradiction or the circumstantial trouble you have is, older saints are not sovereign like He is. And older saints obviously are going to need periodic reproof because they're legitimately wrong where God is not. But there is a way to approach those older saints. There's a pastor who basically put it like this: the rebuke of an elder should be a reminder, not a reprimand. So approach these older men and these older women as you would a father or a mother, with honor, with respect, in encouraging tones. It doesn't just limit this, though, to older men and older women. They're the ones who are the problem, and we got to address just them. No, it says also with younger men and younger women also. How does it say we're to address them? We're to address them as brothers and as sisters. So let's just have a thought experiment here. Some of you lived this, like for me, 35, 40 years ago. Some of you are living it right now. The way that you relate with brothers and sisters. How does that go when you have a problem? I want you to remember how this is saying, but if I had to guess, does anybody handle those problems with a full-out fight? Did you in your past? I'm not talking to you guys who are living it now. Yes, I am talking to you too. Does it end up with a fight? Does it end up with you mistreating or perhaps teasing the other person relentlessly or hurting them intentionally. But if I had to guess, this is also a part of it. You ultimately end up loving that person still. Now, the approach here, the one of respect, we're to encourage them as well. And it's an approach that's full of respect, and it's displayed to the older with honor. It's displayed with the brothers and sisters as their equals and as their peers. There's not a patronizing of them. There's not a I'm better than you in this. There's a coming alongside. Remember that term, encourage? What we said it means is to speak or to call alongside. It's the idea of brothers arm in arm, sisters shoulder to shoulder, identifying with each other, together in the battle that's in front of them, and living out, yes, sometimes correctives, but so that we all can get to the place where we need to be. So again, I just ask, have you ever confronted a brother or sister in your biological setting? What approach, when you did so, brought the best results? Was it a punch to the face? Was it a slighting, slanderous, kind of like rip into their person with your words? Was it belittlement or berating or ignoring them or removing yourself from them? I can't take you anymore. No. No, it's not. So I just want us to understand this instruction, too, also of how do you, like Timothy as a young man instructing a young man or a young woman. This is not just limited to how the young are to address the young. It also carries some connotation to how an older person should address the young, those young whippersnappers that are foolish and reckless. It infers something regarding the way that they should engage them, and there's a respect even that's given to those who are younger. They are your brothers and sisters still. You may carry some kind of credibility as an authority. You certainly have had more experience. Maybe you are the aunt or the uncle, but it's never a thing of you're beneath me and I'm superior in my essence. Now, there is an aside that's given in here that I don't want to speak to really quickly, and then we're going to apply this and bring it home. When he speaks about Timothy and his encouragement towards the younger women, what's the little caveat or the aside that he puts in there as well? How is it that he's supposed to approach these women as sisters? It says in all purity. There's something said here for the way that genders need to relate to one another, not just generations. It says to do it in all purity. It is clearly speaking here of cross-gender relationships. It insinuates that there must be that. We are brothers and sisters. We're not separated as in you can have nothing. We have to interact as brothers and sisters. But it does speak to the possibility of sexual misconduct or the exploitation of another person. It's clearly saying to treat her as a sister. And sisters, I would encourage you, that means treat the one who's a man as a brother. And I'm going to make a statement that's just screaming from this. If we turn it from a brother and a sister relationship and begin to objectify the person who's across the gender from us, to use them, it's tantamount to incest. So there needs to be a respect for each other, a holy respect for each other, men to women, women to men. We need to relate to each other. The idea of avoiding each other is continuing the objectification of one another. So for me, as a guy, you're my sister. I'm not going to ignore you. I am going to engage you in conversation, down in soul level thought. I want to know what's going on in your life and I want to be there to help. But I do not want to do so in a way that exploits you or manipulates you or uses you. I want to treat you with all purity, caring for your soul as my sister. And we could say the very same thing if it was a lady up here speaking to you men. So this is just an important aside that is mentioned there. Now here's the deal. There are applications screaming at us as we look at this text. Let me just go through two specifically. Application number one, South Durham Church, is that if we dismiss younger persons that we don't like or we think we don't need, we don't want, that idea is confronted by an approach that raises and respects these younger persons who claim to know Jesus and are seeking to live for him as brothers and sisters, not treating them as underlings or servants or fools. Frankly, this church, we need the younger generation. And there is a way to lead them as a servant. I can see it with my adult children now. Like I say, Louette and I are empty nesters, which means my kids have grown up. My baby turned 21 last week. I have no more children. I have all adults. And I can tell you right now that if I go to correct those children who are now adults in a controlling or a demanding fashion, it rarely works. And even if I could get them to conform their behavior, you know what I did to the relationship? I distanced it. So I want to encourage us to, number one, understand we need younger brothers and sisters. It is sometimes easier to not be bothered by the people who never go to bed. It's easier sometimes to not have to change what I think or the way I've done something. It's easier to feel justified that I don't have to. And I sit here and I think there are young people all around us. Now, many of you would consider yourself young, and we are relatively young. But let me put it this way. We live in Durham, right at the RTP. There are universities within a 15-minute drive of here full of young people, younger than most of us in here. We need them. The RTP is full of young professionals. We need them. Will they have to be corrected at times? Of course they will. But they need to be corrected with all of the dignity as one who's regarded as a brother or a sister. They need us, and we need them. Let me flip it. The dismissal of younger persons is one thing, but also the dismissal of older persons who, let's be honest, they're slower, they're more cautious, they're old-fashioned. But that mindset is confronted by an approach that raises and respects those people to the level of mothers and fathers. There's actually, and John Stott had pointed this out in something that I read, we don't have it in our Western culture. In the African culture and the Asian culture, they end up calling all old people with great respect auntie or aunt or uncle. There's just a respect that's given there. You need them. You don't need them and to view them as they're outdated or they're burdensome. They're a speed bump for us accomplishing what it is we want to get done. I'll put it this way. We need the older generation. And we can lead that older generation as servants as well. I've seen it in my job with people who were superiors to me, with co-workers with me who are older than me. There's not many of them much older than me anymore, but I have lived that before. And I've seen how you can lead these persons, not by going in and demeaning them for their old, outdated ways, but rather ask questions. come alongside them and seek to understand what it is they've understood through years of experience. Seek to empathize with why they would think that way. Seek to encourage them to trust the God who holds on to them and knows them best and has them as needed to be a part of who we are. We need parent figures in the household of God. Look, I know that in my time, I have dismissed them. And most often when I did, it was to my own hurt. They may slow me down. They may slow me down. But you know what? A lot of times, if I would stop and listen, they might save me from my own inexperience and from my own rashness. Do they need to be corrected at times? Absolutely. But they need to be corrected as a reminder, and it needs to be done full of respect. They need us, and we need them. As I close, let me just remind you of something. In Mark chapter 3, Jesus had just begun his public ministry. And he had called disciples. The Pharisees had misunderstood him, and he had come back and confronted them with what's true. Healings in Mark chapter 3 had already been going on, and the crowds were just increasing. But there comes this point in that where the text actually says that Jesus' mother and brothers actually came to the house where he was, and they said, "Hey, would you go tell Jesus we need to talk to him?" How do you think Jesus responded when they said that? Do you think he just dismissed them? If you just read this part, you might think so. Do you remember how Jesus treated Mary at the cross? He looks straight at his disciple John, and he knows he's leaving, and his earthly father Joseph has died, and he says, "Woman, this is your son. It's a charge. Take care of her." He included his brothers as time went on. Our epistle to James, this is the half-brother of Jesus who didn't believe in Jesus at first. He grew up with him, for goodness sakes. But he comes to faith. So he's open arms, ready, but there is a corrective here. And Jesus ends up saying in Mark chapter 3, looking at his disciples, "Here are my brothers. Here is my sister. Here is my mother. This is my family. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother." You know, I spoke of my brother Dan earlier on, who's my biological brother, and I used to mistreat him sometimes and get him to do things that I would never want anyone to make me do, but it was fun and funny. Ha ha, I got you to eat cat food or something like that. But you know, I'm glad he's my physical brother, and I'm glad we grew up together, but I can tell you that now we are brothers as fellow sinners under the grace of Jesus. There's shortcomings and hardships that have been exposed as children of God together, not just children of Bill and Catherine, my mom and dad. We're nearer now, though we're physically far apart, than we were when we were 5th and 8th grade. So South Durham, here's what I want to encourage us with. We are family. You need to be here encouraging the older among you as you would a parent. And you need to be encouraging the younger among you as you would a sibling. In all of this, understand we need each other. Actually, we are a gift to each other. God help us to please love each other as He has loved us. And loved us to the point that He ends up calling us to be children of God. He's made us His. And as a result of that, given us each other. Encourage one another, brothers and sisters. With all due respect, encourage one another.